today's episode, we're exploring 5 worst deaths during an African safari, from a freelance photographer who got too close to the king of beasts to a researcher whose fatal assumption cost her everything. Let's begin with the first story, where one woman's dream vacation became her final journey. It was September 12, 2015, and the Mara River cut through the heart of Kenya's Masai Mara like a brown serpent, its muddy waters carrying the stories of countless migrations and predator encounters. The riverbank buzzed with the activity of a budget safari group, their guide pointing out hippos lounging on the opposite shore, while tourists snapped photos from what they believed was a safe distance. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the African savanna, creating shimmering heat waves that distorted the landscape and made the river's cool waters appear inviting. Amanda Foster had been dreaming of this moment for 3 years, working double shifts as a veterinary nurse in Toronto to save enough money for her first African safari. At 34, she had finally scraped together the funds for what she called her once-in-a-lifetime adventure, though budget constraints had forced her to choose a tour operator that promised authentic wilderness experiences at rock-bottom prices. The company's safety protocols were minimal, and their guides often managed groups twice the recommended size. Amanda's outdoor experience in the Canadian wilderness had given her confidence around wildlife, but nothing had prepared her for the raw power and unpredictability of African predators. She had been the most adventurous member of her tour group, often wandering away from the designated viewing areas to get closer shots of animals, despite repeated warnings from their overworked guide. That afternoon, the group had stopped at a popular river crossing point where tourists could observe hippos and potentially spot crocodiles from the safety of the elevated bank. Amanda had been frustrated by the distance from the animals and the crowds of other tourists blocking her view. The guide had moved about 10 feet uphill to assist older tourists over uneven rocks, temporarily losing a clear line of sight to the rest of the group. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators, perfectly adapted for ambush hunting in river environments. These massive reptiles can reach lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 1,500 pounds, with bite forces capable of crushing bones and holding prey underwater until drowning occurs. Nile crocodiles are masters of camouflage, able to remain motionless for hours while appearing to be floating logs or debris. Their attack speed and powerful death roll make them responsible for more human fatalities in Africa than any other large predator. Amanda stepped off the designated viewing area and moved towards the shallows, trying to position herself closer to the hippos for photos. The murky water made it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface, and other tourists later said she appeared focused on getting a clearer shot as she inched closer to the bank. She moved slowly and carefully, testing each step as she made her way deeper into the river. The muddy bank showed disturbances that rangers later identified as signs of recent crocodile movement. Based on drag marks and compressed vegetation along the shallows, investigators concluded that a large crocodile had been positioned among the debris, where fallen logs and muddy water often make animals difficult to detect. The area was also within hippo territory, making it doubly dangerous for humans to enter the water. As Amanda stepped into knee-deep water near the disturbed section of the bank, a sudden surge of movement erupted from the shallows. Witnesses saw the crocodile break the surface and clamp onto her leg, the force of the strike knocking her off balance and sending her backward into the deeper water. People in the group reported a burst of splashing and a brief twisting motion at the surface, consistent with the start of a crocodile death roll. Amanda's body was pulled underwater as the reptile maintained its grip. Only brief surfacing was observed. The rest of the struggle remained hidden in the murky water. The attack continued with repeated submersions as Amanda's struggles grew weaker. Amanda's screams had alerted the tour group, and her guide rushed toward the water's edge while shouting warnings to the other tourists. He grabbed a long branch and attempted to reach Amanda, but the crocodile had already dragged her into deeper water where the current was stronger. The muddy river made it impossible to see what was happening beneath the surface. Other tourists screamed and pointed as the massive reptile surfaced briefly with Amanda still in its jaws. The crocodile then disappeared beneath the murky water, dragging its prey toward the deeper pools. The entire attack had lasted less than 2 minutes from start to finish. KWS Rangers responded from the nearest patrol point and reached the area in just under an hour, which was typical for that stretch of river. The strong current and the crocodile's movement pattern made immediate recovery unlikely. Her body was located 3 days later when a downstream patrol found it lodged against a cluster of fallen branches, showing the characteristic injuries of a crocodile attack. The incident report cited supervision lapses within the tour group, including failure to maintain distance from the river's edge. The tour operator was required to adjust group management and tighten safety procedures before resuming activities along that section of the river. Yet tourists weren't the only people who underestimated the deadly power of African wildlife. In South Africa, a photographer's pursuit of the perfect shot would bring him face to face with the continent's apex predator. It was June 8, 2017, and the golden afternoon light filtered through the acacia trees of a private reserve in the Greater Kruger region, creating the perfect conditions for wildlife photography. The South African wilderness stretched endlessly in all directions, its ancient rhythms undisturbed by the modern world beyond its borders. Marcus van der Berg had arrived in South Africa 3 weeks earlier, armed with professional camera gear and dreams of capturing images that would set him apart from the thousands of other wildlife photographers flooding the market. At 29, the freelance photographer from Amsterdam was facing mounting financial pressure, with his savings depleted and his girlfriend threatening to leave if he didn't find a stable income soon. His experience photographing wildlife in European forests had given him confidence, but nothing had prepared him for the raw power and unpredictability of African predators. Marcus had been taking increasingly risky shots, leaving his rental vehicle to get ground-level perspectives that he believed would make his images more marketable to magazines and stock photo agencies. That afternoon, Marcus had spotted a magnificent male lion resting under a large marula tree, its golden mane catching the late sunlight in a way that promised spectacular photographs. The lion appeared relaxed and sleepy in the afternoon heat, occasionally flicking its tail to ward off flies, but otherwise remaining motionless. Marcus saw an opportunity for the dramatic close-up shots that could make his career. African lions are apex predators with no natural enemies except humans, possessing the strength and speed to take down prey much larger than themselves. Male lions can weigh up to 420 pounds and are capable of explosive bursts of speed, reaching 50 miles per hour. Their powerful jaws deliver bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch, but lions typically kill by securing the throat and suffocating their prey rather than crushing bones. Their claws help anchor and pin down animals during the struggle. Lions can become aggressive when humans approach too closely or behave unpredictably in their immediate vicinity. Marcus parked his vehicle about 330 feet from the tree and began photographing the lion with his telephoto lens. The images were good, but he knew they lacked the dramatic impact that would make them stand out in a crowded market. After several minutes of shooting from inside his vehicle, Marcus chose to step out to attempt closer, low-angle shots. He quietly opened his car door and began approaching the lion on foot, his camera ready to capture the ground-level shots that he believed would transform his portfolio. Marcus moved slowly and deliberately, stopping frequently to take photos as he closed the distance between himself and the massive predator. The male lion's behavior began to change as Marcus approached, with his recovered photographs later showing the animal's ears becoming more alert and its posture shifting from inactive to watchful. The clicking of the camera shutter and Marcus's steady movement had clearly drawn the lion's attention. When Marcus reached a distance of about 100 feet, he crouched to get a low-angle shot. His change in posture in the final frames coincided with the lion rising and fixing its attention directly on him. The lion charged with tremendous speed, covering the distance in seconds. The position of Marcus's dropped camera and footprints suggested he had turned to move away when the charge began. began, but the lion closed the gap almost immediately. Tracks and disturbed soil indicated the lion made contact from the front left side, knocking Marcus to the ground with its forepaws before inflicting severe injuries to his neck and head. Forensic examination later determined that the head and neck trauma caused rapid death. Marcus's rental vehicle sat empty a short distance away, its door still open and engine running. The lion moved away from the body, which remained at the site until reserve staff located the scene after he failed to return to the lodge at his scheduled time. Investigators found Marcus's camera equipment scattered across the ground, with his final photographs documenting the lion's escalating attention as he approached. The images provided a clear record of the sequence of events and reinforced existing guidelines on maintaining safe distances from large predators. The reserve incorporated the findings into its safety briefings for self-drive visitors, emphasizing the requirement to remain inside vehicles in the presence of lions. However, photographers weren't the only people who found themselves in deadly encounters with African wildlife. In Botswana, a honeymooner's misunderstanding of animal behavior would lead to a tragic encounter with one of Africa's most unpredictable giants. It was March 22, 2014, and early sunlight spread across a private Okavango Delta concession, where a walking safari group gathered near the lodge, receiving safety instructions before following elephant-used game trails. Lisa Martinez had planned this honeymoon for over a year, choosing Botswana after months of research and saving from her marketing job in Singapore. At 26, she had grown up in a dense urban environment with little exposure to large animals, though she had always been fascinated by wildlife photography. Her excitement often made her inattentive to surroundings, especially when something visually caught her interest. Her new husband, David, had noticed this habit during previous trips, but assumed the group setting and professional guide would keep them safe. Their package included walking excursions, boat outings through the Delta channels, and nights in elevated canvas suites overlooking the floodplains. Lisa had been most eager for the walking safaris, believing the experience would feel more authentic than viewing animals from a vehicle. As the group moved along a well-used game trail, the guide pointed out fresh elephant tracks embedded in the soft earth. Lisa photographed the enormous footprints, pausing often to capture details of bark-scraped trees and dung piles that marked recent elephant movement. The guide kept the group in a tight formation, explaining signs of elephant behavior and repeating instructions to maintain awareness of the surroundings, especially in areas with thick mopane woodland. African elephants are the largest land mammals on Earth, with mature bulls weighing up to 13,000 pounds and standing more than 10 feet tall at the shoulder. Bulls in musth, an annual period of elevated testosterone, show increased aggression, temporal gland secretions streaming down the sides of the face, and continuous urine dribbling. Guides in the Delta are trained to read these signals and adjust routes accordingly, as bulls in musth may charge when approached within their personal space. During a short rest stop, the group paused near an open patch of floodplain. Lisa noticed a cluster of small yellow flowers growing near a thicket and stepped off the main trail to photograph them. She knelt to adjust her camera angle, absorbed in the close-up shot. As she focused on her lens settings, she didn't register the guide motioning the group forward around a slight bend bordered by shrubs. When Lisa finally stood and looked up, she realized she was alone, and no more than about 65 feet from a large bull elephant emerging from the vegetation. The bull exhibited clear signs of musth, dark streaks running down from the temporal glands, and steady urine dribbling onto the ground. His ears were spread wide, and he rocked his head in slow, deliberate movements while emitting a deep, rumbling vibration. Lisa, having never encountered a wild elephant before, misread the posture. Her camera captured several frames showing the bull's ears out and trunk lifted in a warning gesture, but she interpreted the behavior as curiosity rather than aggression. She shifted a few feet to her left, trying to improve her angle on the shot, unaware she was closing the distance. The bull held his ground at first, continuing his warning displays. The photographs recovered later showed the elephant's ears stiffened outward and his trunk curled back toward his chest, signals experienced guides recognize as escalating tension. Lisa remained focused on her camera's viewfinder, not noticing the shift. When she moved within the bull's critical distance zone, the elephant charged. Witness descriptions provided by David and the guide, who had turned back after noticing her absence, described the sound of cracking vegetation and a sudden burst of movement from the thicket. Lisa reacted only when she heard the rush of the charge, lifting her head as the bull closed the 65-foot gap in seconds. Tracks and impressions in the soil later showed the bull struck her with a lateral sweep of his tusk, knocking her to the ground and causing deep puncture injuries. The impact dislodged her camera, which landed several feet away. The elephant then delivered several trampling steps, each one consistent with the severity of the trauma identified in the post-incident examination. The guide shouted and attempted to distract the bull from a distance, while David, who had hurried back upon hearing the disturbance, arrived moments after the initial strike. The bull retreated only after several seconds, turning into the brush and disappearing from view. Lisa remained motionless on the ground, her injuries incompatible with survival. Reserve staff initiated an emergency response immediately after the guide radioed for help. A medical helicopter reached the clearing in under an hour, though the on-site assessment confirmed Lisa had died from extensive trauma. Her camera card, recovered next to the trail, documented the sequence of the elephant's escalating warning displays. The concession reviewed the incident internally and updated walking safari procedures, reinforcing stricter spacing rules and mandatory buddy protocols. Guides added new reminders for guests to remain within sight at all times, emphasizing the dangers of misinterpreting elephant behavior in close-range encounters. Still, honeymooners weren't the only tourists who found themselves in deadly encounters with African wildlife. In Zimbabwe, a solo traveler's lack of knowledge about local animals would prove fatal when she encountered one of Africa's most dangerous creatures. It was August 17, 2016, and the dim pre-dawn light settled over a budget bush camp used by safari travelers on the outskirts of the Hwange region of western Zimbabwe. The camp offered inexpensive accommodation for travelers wanting a close connection to the African bush, with canvas tents arranged in a loose semicircle around a small block of shared bathrooms and a simple cooking shelter. The fencing around the grounds discouraged smaller animals from entering, but provided little real protection from larger wildlife moving through established game corridors. Jennifer Walsh had arrived a week earlier, seeking a reset after a difficult divorce. At 38, she had spent more than a decade teaching in Melbourne, her life oriented around predictability and routine. The trip to Africa was meant to interrupt that pattern. Her travel blog reflected the shift, each entry describing her attempts to push beyond her usual comfort zones as she grew increasingly confident navigating the camp on her own. Her outdoor experience in the Australian bush had given her a sense of capability, but she lacked practical understanding of African wildlife behavior. She frequently mentioned in her blog that some of the camp safety rules seemed excessive, especially the advice to request an escort before walking to the facilities during low-light hours. The previous mornings had passed without incident, reinforcing her belief that the short path to the bathrooms was safe enough to manage alone. African buffalo are responsible for many serious incidents across the continent. Solitary bulls, especially older individuals separated from herds, are known to be unpredictable and defensive when startled at close range. Weighing upwards of 1,700 pounds and built with dense muscle, they can accelerate rapidly over short distances, using their powerful necks and curved horns to strike with immense force. Their reactions on foot differ significantly from those of more familiar grazing animals. Experienced guides emphasize that lone bulls must always be given considerable space. Just before dawn, Jennifer unzipped her tent and stepped into the cool morning air. The camp's escort service operated during these hours, but reaching the bathroom block usually took less than a minute, and she had grown accustomed to making the walk alone. The area was quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the distant cough of a lion far beyond the perimeter. As she walked along the dim path, she unknowingly approached a lone buffalo bull that had entered the camp sometime during the night. The seasonal water source near the property often drew wildlife close, and the minimal fencing allowed larger animals to pass through with little resistance. The bull stood partially concealed near the path, motionless in the low light. Jennifer noticed the dark shape only when she had already committed to the path. She slowed, attempting to shift backward, while keeping the animal in sight. The bull responded by lowering his head slightly, his attention fixed on her movement. There were no loud warning calls or dramatic signals, just the subtle posture change that experienced guides recognize as heightened alertness. She turned toward the nearest building, attempting to increase her distance, but the movement triggered a rapid change in the bull's behavior. He lunged forward with a burst of speed, covering the ground in seconds. Soil impressions and drag marks documented later showed the bull had charged from a close range, giving Jennifer almost no time to react. She was struck from behind after turning to move away, the impact throwing her forward onto the hard ground. The bull's horns caused deep injuries, and trampling followed immediately. The repeated blows left significant trauma consistent with high-force impacts, as confirmed later by the medical assessment. Jennifer attempted to crawl toward the building according to the position of her body and the disturbed soil, but the buffalo's aggression continued for several seconds before he moved away and disappeared into the brush beyond the perimeter. Several nearby guests awoke to the sounds of the commotion, sharp impacts, snapping brush, and brief cries, and remained inside their tents, uncertain of the source. Camp staff, alerted by the noise, arrived within moments using a vehicle and spotlights, which were effective in driving the animal away from the immediate area. When the scene became safe to approach, staff assessed Jennifer's condition and radioed for emergency medical assistance. A medical helicopter was dispatched from a nearby lodge network, reaching the site in under an hour. The paramedic team confirmed that Jennifer had died before they arrived, the injuries too extensive for any intervention to succeed. Her belongings, scattered along the path, were collected as part of the incident documentation. An internal investigation by camp management found that the bull likely entered the grounds during the night while moving between water sources. The report also noted gaps in guest adherence to escort protocols and recommended reinforcing mandatory movement guidelines during low-light hours. The camp added additional motion-triggered lights near the facilities and increased patrols during dawn and dusk. The incident served as a reminder of the risks associated with moving through unfenced or lightly fenced bush camps. Staff emphasized the importance of escorts for all guests, regardless of experience or confidence, and updated their briefings to include clearer explanations of buffalo behavior and the hazards posed by lone bulls in close quarters. Yet solo travelers weren't the only people who found themselves in deadly encounters with African wildlife. In Tanzania, a researcher's overconfidence would lead to a fatal miscalculation with one of our closest evolutionary relatives. It was November 4th, 2013, and the steep forested slopes of the Mahale region in western Tanzania were heavy with early morning humidity. A small, remote research outpost overlooked the edge of Lake Tanganyika, its isolation forcing the handful of researchers living there to operate with minimal support. The trails leading into the forest were narrow and uneven, opening occasionally in rings where the partially habituated chimpanzee community for the project was known to feed and rest. Dr. Rachel Morrison had been based at the outpost for 8 months, documenting social behavior in a chimpanzee troop still in the later stages of habituation. At 31, she had already published several papers on primate social dynamics, and her supervisors regarded her as promising. Staff shortages at the outpost, however, meant researchers frequently worked alone, more often than official guidelines recommended. Rachel's long hours in the field and growing familiarity with individual chimpanzees had gradually led her to take closer positions during observation sessions. Her recent field notes recorded rising tension within the troop. Several younger males had begun challenging the long-established alpha male, leading to more displays, vocalizations, and skirmishes. These periods of instability were well known among researchers as high-risk windows, when male chimps could react unpredictably to changes in their surroundings, including the presence of humans. Chimpanzees possess powerful upper body strength relative to their size and can easily overpower a person at close range. Their attacks often involve rapid, repeated bites to exposed areas, particularly the face, hands, and limbs. While highly intelligent, they are also deeply influenced by social hierarchy, and moments of tension can elevate aggressive behavior toward anything they perceive as intrusive or poorly timed. That morning, Rachel set out alone to observe the troop during feeding, taking a narrow trail leading to one of their known foraging sites. She positioned herself closer than her previous entries recommended in order to record more detailed data on the alpha male's responses to challenges from subordinates. Her handwritten notes from the previous days showed a pattern of gradually decreasing observation distances, an early indication that she was taking risks she might not have taken under full staffing. The alpha male was feeding when she arrived, but his behavior showed clear signs of agitation. Piloerection along his arms and back, abrupt head turns, and short, sharp vocalizations toward nearby males. These behaviors had been recorded by researchers before as indicators of elevated stress. Rachel noted them but remained in position, focusing on documenting his interactions. As she shifted for a better view, the movement coincided with a burst of aggression in the troop. A subordinate male approached too closely, provoking a sudden display from the alpha, bristling, stomping, and a quick charge toward the nearest disturbance. In the heightened tension, Rachel's proximity placed her within the range of his redirected aggression. The alpha closed the distance rapidly and lunged, knocking Rachel off balance. Soil impressions and scuffed leaves later documented at the site showed the location where she fell. The chimpanzee delivered repeated bites to her face, arms, and upper body, consistent with the high-force tearing injuries documented in other primate attacks. Branches and disturbed vegetation indicated she attempted to shield herself, but the chimp's strength and speed made resistance impossible. Her screams carried through the forest and were heard by 2 research assistants working several hundred feet away. They followed the sound and approached cautiously, using loud shouts and thrown sticks to try to deter the chimp. Their efforts eventually caused him to break off the attack and move back towards the troop. But the injuries Rachel sustained were severe, and she was unable to speak or respond by the time her colleagues reached her. Field staff initiated the outpost's emergency procedure, radioing for evacuation support. Due to the remoteness of the area, the response involved coordinating a boat pickup from the lakeshore, followed by air transport from a larger station farther north. The process required time, and Rachel died from blood loss and trauma before she could be transported. An internal review conducted by the research program later concluded that Rachel had been working too close to the troop during a period of known instability, and that staffing shortages had contributed to lapses in standard safety practices. The report recommended stricter enforcement of 2 researcher minimums for all observations, revised distance guidelines for partially habituated chimpanzee groups, and clearer protocols regarding social tension periods within troops. The incident underscored the risks of conducting primate research in remote environments and the importance of maintaining safety measures even when familiarity with the animals grows over time. The outpost implemented the recommended changes in the months that followed, emphasizing that no data collection goal justified compromising safety near potentially dangerous wildlife. Thanks for watching. Enjoy this video. Click more.